going to show how to make this snow effect using Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter. My snow texture is inspired by a blender texture by Ryan King Art. I'll put a link to it in the description for the video. This snow effect has 4 different levels. I'm starting out with the cellnoise layer that gives it sort of an overall puffy effect here. For the second texture, I'm using cellnoise 2 with the final parameter set to 4. This gives it a nice crystalline effect that resembles snow. The third effect is a Perlin noise effect, which adds to the fluffiness of the snow. After I did that, I thought it needed some motion, so I added a sort of a gradient effect on top of that I added as another layer. This might be useful as a background for sort of a seasonal greetings card or something like that. If you think about snow, it has a number of characteristics to it. You think of it as mostly just white, but it also sort of reflects the colors of its surroundings. And if I look at this, the shadowed snow looks either sort of bluish or purple, and the snow with the sunlight on it can almost pick up a bit of a yellow cast to it. Here is another picture of snow. This one is more just gray, and then this one has a distinctly bluish tone to it. I'm going to start with a blank document, 1024 by 768. Make sure it's in RGB color. Create that. I'm going to add a fill layer of black, use the select tool, and then add a live procedural texture filter to this. I'm going to be having 3 different layers or 3 different textures that I'm mixing together on this one. And so to get started, I'm going to add an equation. I'll assign it to all 3 channels, and I'm going to set the coordinate variable up to v equals vec2 rx comma ry. I'm just going to divide by w, so that way I'll scale each of these different textures individually. I'm going to add a custom scaling inputs for the 3 different textures. I'll call this one scale cellnoise. We're going to call this one scale cellnoise 2. And I'll call this one scale Perlin. I'm going to set this one up to 60, this one up to 50, and this one up to 8. I'm going to add 3 different 0 to 1 inputs. I'm going to call them I1, I2, and I3. And I'm just going to turn these 2 down, and I'll leave this one all the way up. My first texture is going to be a cellnoise texture. I'll call it variable t1 equals cellnoise of v.x times a, comma v.y times a. So for cellnoise, you have to put in the x and y components individually. I can access the x component of my vector by putting a .x after the v. This also has a third input. I'm going to set it to 1, which is the lowest level of randomization for this type of texture. And if I just look at that, so there's the basic cellnoise pattern. I want the inverse of this though. I'd like these little black points to be light colored and then these to be dark. So I'm going to take 1 minus this value. So that's how I want it. I want it to be sort of little bumps along the way. And I'm going to scale this independently, so I'm going to put parentheses around this whole thing and times I1. Like that. So now I can fade this in and out with this slider. Now I'm going to do the second texture. It'll be T2 equals cellnoise 2. v.x times b, and v dot y times b. But I also want to multiply these by 10 because I want this to be a much smaller pattern than the other one. This also has a third input variable, and that one will sort of give it a crystalline looking effect as you bring that up. So I'm going to set that to 4, and then just look at this. And I have to put a variable on the front of this. So that's what it looks like if I bring this, if I look at this, bring this down to about 10, you can see it has this crystalline look to it. I'm going to multiply this by the variable i2 so I can fade it in and out. So there it's all the way off, and then I can bring it in. You can see that it has a nice sort of crystalline look to it. So that's the second part of this. For the third part of this filter, I'm going to add another variable, t3, and this will be perlincubic. And I'm going to multiply by v times c times 10, because I also want this one to be quite small. And it has octaves. I'll just leave that at 10. And I need a smoothing factor on this, so I'll make that an S. And then I'm going to multiply this by I3. So I need to add my smoothing factor, which is an S. Bring the smoothing factor down. And actually I want this to be perlinhcubic. I want it to go in both directions. Add and subtract. So the harmonic functions, if you put an h in it, instead of going from 0 to 1, they actually range from -1 to 1. If I zoom in on this one quite a bit, it looks something like that. But I'll have this out to about 40 or 50, make it look like nice fluffy snow. Now that I've got my 3 texture variables set up, I can combine them. I'll put it in parentheses and just have T1 plus T2 plus T3. And I'm going to multiply this by an overall intensity factor or fader I and add an offset to it. So I'll be able to adjust this when I get my gradient map on here. I'll be able to adjust it so it looks just right. So I is my general fader for the whole thing, and then a -1 to 1 input for the offset OF, so general offset. The final form of the equation for the snow filter is variable vec2 Rx Ry over W, variable T1, 1 minus cell noise of v dot x times a, v dot y times a, comma 1, and then that whole thing is multiplied by I1. And the second texture, variable T2 equals cell noise 2, v dot x times b times 10, and v dot y times b times 10, comma 4 times I2. The last texture is variable T3 perlinhcubic v times c times 10, comma 10, comma s times I3. Then I add those all together, T1 plus T2 plus T3, put in parentheses, multiply by I, and add an offset. See what it looks like with the gradient. I won't be able to really tell how I'm adjusting this until I get the gradient on there. So I'm going to go to the adjustments, add a gradient map, and I'm going to start with just the default map, which doesn't look too good. But I'm going to add 4 different colors to it. This one I'll set at 33, and this one I'm going to set at 67. Now I'm going to choose 2 colors from shadow and 2 colors from the light side. So to get my colors, I'm going to open up one of my reference documents. I use this as my reference document, so I'm going to copy this and paste it in over here. Make it much smaller. And I'm going to grab some colors from this document. So I'm going to take 2 from the highlighted areas and 2 from the shadowy areas. I'm going to my gradient. I'll start with the shadow. Okay, instead of red, I'm going to grab this color picker, and if I left click on that, hold it down and drag it over here, I can pick a color from a shadowy area. So I'm going to try to get about as dark as I can get over here and choose that one. And then if I click it again, it'll transfer that color to this position. I'm going to choose the next one. This one I also want in shadow, but I want it to be the lightest possible shadow. So I'm going to try to choose something that's in shadow but looks pretty light. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to choose that one and then click on it again to lock that one in. Now I'm going to go to the lighted areas, click on my dropper, find this one I want to be sort of the darkest area in the sunlit areas. So I see some nice shadowy spots here. I'm going to choose that one and I'm going to lock that one in. And then the last one will be the lightest area in the sunlit areas. Now that I've got my equation and my custom inputs set up, I'm ready to create my snow texture effect. I've got the cell noise one, and I can bring that up to make my little snowballs. I'm going to bring that down to about 4. It gives me a few of these in the pattern. Then for my cell noise, if I look at those and bring that up, and I'm just going to zoom in on those a little bit. I want them to look like nice little crystals. Don't want the white areas to wash out too much, but since I'm using harmonic Perlin noise, they'll sort of subtract when I start adding this. Right, so it looks sort of good, like little crystals. And now if I start adding the Perlin noise to that, it'll give it a little more depth and make it look just a little bit more fluffy. So that looks pretty good. I think that this is maybe a little bit too much contrast here, so I'm going to bring the cell noise down a little bit and then adjust the offset up a little. Alright, so there it is. It may not look exactly like snow, but gives a sort of a little fluffy effect and would probably make a good background. Now in addition to that, I added a gradient filter on top of this, and this is the complex gradient that I did in a previous video. I've got it set to screen mode, and I'm going to bring that down all the way down and then just bring it up until I can see a little bit of that. So that's the final snow-like effect I was trying for. Maybe it doesn't look exactly like snow, but I think it gives you sort of that impression of snow. And I think it'd make a good background for something if you're trying to make it have that wintry feel to it. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.